Hello, puppies and kittens. One of the really nice things about my job is that as a science communicator and all of that is that I get to interview actual scientists and authors and general thinkers, philosophers, and so forth. I get to meet with some of the best minds. And today I'm working with another science communicator. This one specializes mostly in cosmology and physics. This is Phil Halper. And Phil, you brought a friend along.
I have.
Who is he?
He's my co-author, Nyash Ashodi. Nyash, why don't you say hello?
Hello. Hi, Phil. Hi, Aaron. I'm Nyash. I'm a cosmologist by training. I'm also a professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And right now I'm joining you from Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, also in beautiful Waterloo, Canada, where I also spend half of my time usually.
Yeah. And we've written this book, The Battle of the Big Bang, which is all about competing models for the very early universe, whether it had a beginning, what do we mean by Big Bang, how do we make progress and perhaps push through the Big Bang and see what happened before.
I often refer other people to the videos you did on the cosmological argument, where you interviewed a whole bunch of cosmologists and so forth.
Yeah.
I'm keen to hear because I've often brought up that the Big Bang is not necessarily one fixed concept. That, as it would in much of science, that there are competing hypotheses or different versions thereof. Can you flesh out what that means in this case?
Yeah. So the first thing to flesh out is, what do we even mean by Big Bang? And I think there's an enormous amount of misunderstanding. I've heard people like Joe Rogan say it means the universe came from nothing. Other people say, well, it means the universe had a beginning. But we actually surveyed other physicists at a very prestigious conference in Copenhagen. And we asked the physicists, what do you think the term Big Bang means? And what they said was that it actually is quite a modest theory. It's just a theory that says the universe was in a very hot, dense state about 13.8 billion years ago. And it doesn't say that the universe had a beginning or it came from nothing or anything like that. It just says the universe was in a hot, dense state. So what came before that hot, dense state is the subject of the book. And there's lots of different ideas. I mean, Ash, would you want to sort of unpack some of them?
Oh, sure. But actually, through the course of these conversations that Phil and I had for many years, leading up to writing this book and then writing the book and then talking about it afterwards, there was one analogy that has come about, which is, I think, very apt, and it has to do with memory, which is to say that, okay, so we're trying to remember the earliest thing that we can remember. And we are limited memories, but we can kind of get together and try to reconstruct the past and then remember farther and farther back in time. But at some point, our memories get fuzzy. And then the hot Big Bang is the things that we can remember well. But before that, things get fuzzier. And then there are various, it's kind of like waking up from a dream that you're not exactly sure when you woke up from the dream. But there was probably something before. And that something, there are some facts we know about it. For example, the fact that we did wake up and we're still alive. But there are also sometimes things we get to hallucinate. We're trying to remember the dreams that we had. And those memories are fuzzy and scattered. And the process of understanding what came before the Big Bang is, in fact, like trying to remember your dreams, but using all the scientific tools that we have, the best that we can. But there is still a lot of imagination and a lot of fuzziness involved. So
let me ask something important to me that comes up almost every day of my life. Some idiot out there says, well, you atheists believe everything came from nothing. And I don't know any atheist alive who ever believed that, which is a funny thing that I hear people accusing me of this every day for decades. right? I mean, that just gets irritating. No, you're the one that believes in creation ex nihilo. We are
Mhm.
not the ones that believe everything came from nothing. And then they say, well, you believe that there was nothing and then nothing exploded. I'm like, no, there was always something. There was always a singularity, at least in every model of cosmology that I'm aware of. And maybe there are models that are, I mean, I know that there are models that are different, but maybe one of them starts with nothing. I don't think so, but help me out here.
There are some ideas that would suggest the universe came from nothing. We can unpack what we mean by nothing in a second. But there's no consensus about what happened before the Big Bang. So there's a bunch of different proposals. That's what we explore in our book. And the idea of a universe from nothing, I guess it's been associated with atheism because Lawrence Krauss, as a cosmologist, wrote this book called A Universe from Nothing. But actually, he wasn't really promoting his own ideas. He was promoting the ideas of others. In particular, there's sort of two versions of the notion of a universe from nothing that are sort of explored in the literature. One came from the 1970s, from a scientist called Edward Tryon, and he suggested that the universe could come from a quantum vacuum fluctuation. So you might, now there are particles popping in and out of the vacuum. That happens all the time. But they have to go back sort of into the vacuum very, very quickly, like gazillionths of a second. So you might think, how could a universe come out of that and not go back into the vacuum, in a gazillionth of a second? And the answer is that gravity is actually accounted for by having negative energy. So matter has positive energy, gravity has negative, and it's possible that they sum up to zero. So if they sum up to zero, then they could fluctuate and exist for indefinitely long period of time. But that's still a universe from a vacuum, and a vacuum isn't nothing. Like, I think everyone would agree the vacuum is not nothing.
Yeah, I
However,
don't know. I don't know that anybody believes there was ever absolutely nothing.
well,
And then
let me come on to one idea that has been put forward, and that's from a scientist called Alex Vilenkin. And Alex Vilenkin suggested that maybe if we treat space quantum mechanically, that it could fluctuate into existence. And so then it would fluctuate from a state with no space. And that's, or at least no space that we can sort of describe. But what might still have to exist are the laws of physics. And so they would have to sort of exist when there's no sort of space.
you still
But
have
that, I guess,
universal wave function even in that instance.
Niesh, what do you think? Is that a wave function still?
There presumably is a wave function, but I think what we mean by time at that point, and just in any kind of approach to quantum gravity, what time means is very suspicious and very hard to define.
So even then,
Mhm.
you have some sort of existence, pre-existing existence, the existence that people are arguing about.
So I think we have to kind of be clear on something that if we want to do physics or if you want to do science, there must be some set of rules, right? So the science is the study of rules. And we have certainly established a lot of very precise set of rules for what we do today. We have the theory of general relativity. It's very useful. Thanks to Einstein, we can understand gravity and motions on larger scales. We have theory of quantum mechanics. There are these set of rules. But the thing is that these set of rules are not set in a stone, right? So we came up with them at some point because we could describe the phenomena we saw. But we cannot see all the phenomena very well. And in particular, what happens near the Big Bang at early times and what happens, say, inside a black hole, those are things that we haven't seen or haven't seen very clearly. So these set of rules, what they are not entirely nor are not entirely written, especially because these two sets of rules that we have written, quantum mechanics and gravity, aren't really consistent with each other at the mathematical level. So we know that there must be make a more general set of rules. And those set of rules, that gives us the language to describe what could be happening near the Big Bang or before the Big Bang. So we're not saying that these rules didn't exist. We're just saying that we don't know exactly what they are. And to actually describe the language, to use the language that we understand to describe what's happening, we need to know these these rules. So that's why there is discrepancy. That's why there is that different scientists that are all very smart people, like Willenkin, Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, and I have my own ideas. So we all have saying things that seem reasonable, but the reason we cannot quite agree, or we're not saying the same thing, is that we don't actually know what are the right rules. Is it not? What is a nothing? Basically, nothing is it's an easy word to say, but even we know that the meaning of nothing has evolved over time. In quantum mechanics, nothing means one thing. In theory of general relativity, nothing means something completely different. And if you have a generalized theory of quantum gravity, what a nothing is in that may be entirely different from those two as well. And that's why this is just a play on the word. So I don't think there is any reason to get hung up on what universe from nothing means. There is no reason that would be completely wrong, depending on the definition of nothing. So I think that people who make fun of you for not believing or for believing in universe from nothing, they are they are on the right track, because they don't really know what they're talking about.
One thing I would
said,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
One thing I would add is the important point is that, one, the Big Bang doesn't say the universe came from nothing. It just says it came from a hot, dense state. And there are suggestions of the universe coming from nothing, but there's no reason that we have to believe them. They're not proposed by crazy cranks. Vilenkin's a very serious scientist.
Mainstream physics does not hold the belief. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, I've often said, how like there have been some religious apologists who come up with the Kalam cosmological argument. They try to say, well, anything that begins to exist has to have, well, I've come up with my own, and that is that everything that really exists has properties, and that one notable thing that doesn't have properties is God. So kind of falls out of the requirement of existence. And this is where you're talking about like the mathematical limits of reality. And maybe this is the conceptual issue that I have, is that I think that when you get into quantum fluctuations, you're getting the maximum resolution to reality, and there's only so far that it can go before it begins to fade out or pixelate. Maybe I'm thinking of that incorrectly. I'm almost certainly thinking of that incorrectly, but it just strikes me that you can only zoom up so much before things go out of focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you say is right. I mean, there are resolution limits to what we can know. I think that's absolutely correct. But obviously, for issues like the Kalam argument and things like that, the question is, can we probe beyond the Big Bang? Can we understand what might have come before? And it's certainly a difficult thing to do, but I don't think it's impossible. And there are, in the book, we talk about ways that we could probe potentially, different theories about what might have triggered the Big Bang, as it were. So, the leading candidate is probably inflationary cosmology, but there are alternatives, and there are ways that we could in the future distinguish between them. And maybe detect signs of cyclic universes or bouncing universes, or universes coming out of black holes, or universes from a time loop, and all these sorts of things. So I think it's so I think what you say is right, but I think when it comes to this topic, I think it's possible that we can push beyond our current limits of knowledge and see what might have come before the Big Bang, if there was it before.
Now, I've interviewed both Lawrence Krauss and Sean Carroll on this, and I've given them my entirely amateur impression, and both of them have rather unapologetically told me that I was just wrong. So I am interested. I was trying to paraphrase how we can have a beginning of time, or how we can have universes popping into existence like out of like the way the bubbles appear in the bottom of a saucepan coming to boil. It looks like they're coming out of nothing, but they're actually not. It's just this appearance. And there's a number of other things, like when you pass a body through what is it, an MRI? I forget what the resonance is, but it only reads in 2 dimensions. It's taking a 3-dimensional object and reading it in 2 dimensionals all the way through in cutaway, so that the thing seems to appear out of nothing, and that seems to disappear into nothing, but in fact it does not in either case. And as I said, in both cases, that they told me rather unapologetically how wrong I was, and I think Krauss was more trying to sternly correct me, and Carol was just laughing at me. So I'm not expecting kindness from either of you, but do please explain the number of options for different
maybe
concepts of the
maybe
Big Bang.
I could bring a little bit more kindness into cosmology. We could make cosmology kind again, so that to say that yeah, I mean, we don't really know, and I think these are all analogies that we come up with to understand or describe what happened at early times. But really, they are analogies, and we don't really know. And who claims, be it Sean, who we're good friends with, and or Lawrence, who they may have opinions about what might have happened or what makes sense, but those are just opinions. They're not. That's not really hard science, because, as I said, we don't actually have established set of rules. Um, but you mentioned singularity, for example. Singularity is not a thing. I mean, singularity, I often say, is just an admission of failure. So when scientists, or you hear that, okay, scientists believe there's a singularity inside a black hole right at the Big Bang, that's not actually a thing. When we say scientists or anyone says there is singularity, that means that we actually fail to understand what happens there. There is some point where we fail to understand, our laws stop making sense, and then we don't know what's going on. So I kind of agree with the sentiment that you say, that there is not really nothing. There is always something there. But exactly the nature of that something, we cannot, we don't really know. We cannot use everyday analogies like the bubble in the saucepan, or the MRI. I mean, it's probably something like that, but it's probably something much weirder. But then again, I don't really know. So these are all analogies. And I mean, it's really the right set of laws are needed to be written. And part of the goal of what we're doing by studying the Big Bang is trying to formulate not just the story of before the Big Bang, but also the right language, the right set of laws that needs to be used. And this could look like a bouncing universe. We talk about that. It could be a story where maybe time just disappears at some point. So we have holographic models where basically you have a universe just with a space or no time, and no time. There's 3 dimensions of a space, no time. It could be that time turns into a space. That's the model that Stephen Hawking and Jim Hartle came up with, where in fact at some point time turns into a space, which is weird. You just have 4 dimensions of space. So there are all these weird, exotic ideas, but we don't really know which one works, and we all have ideas for how to test them, and that's kind of the way science works.
All right. Well, we've got over 100 viewers at the moment, which is kind of impressive for a Wednesday morning. But we've got a couple of questions posted, so maybe we'll start out by going to them. So, sapient cephalopod, what a great name. Says, could the universe be recursion? Universe condenses to black holes, and the other side of the event horizon then spawns a new universe. Wash, rinse, repeat. Now, Phil, that sounds an awful lot like what was proposed in your video, where you were talking about where the Big Bang was a collapse of a prior state of the universe, and where the arrow of entropy pointed the other way. Am I reading that right?
I think we're confusing like 3 different ideas.
Okay.
So I'll just sort of unpack them a little bit. But one of them I will get Niash to go a bit deeper in, because one of them is actually, both of them are his ideas. But let's talk more generally. So one idea is that the universe came from a black hole, and there are various versions of that. In the book, we talk about several different versions of black hole genesis, we might call it. Niash has made one, so we'll get Niash to unpack his version of it in a moment. But the idea, roughly speaking, is that, well, in a certain version of theoretical physics, there are singularities in the Big Bang, there's singularities in the black hole. maybe that's not a coincidence. When we replace those singularities with something that makes a bit more sense, we'll find that actually they're quite similar, and that a new universe is born out of a black hole. So that's one idea. The idea of recursion is, you could think of it as like a cyclic universe. And again, Neash has made one version of a cyclic universe, which maybe we'll get him to unpack in a second. But the idea is that the universe does repeat in some sense. Now, there are different versions of cyclic universes. We have a whole chapter in the book on the different versions of the cyclic universes. Some of them expand and contract, others do not expand and contract. There could be different ways that you can realize this. And the one that Neash has worked on is actually quite similar to a philosophical idea that Nietzsche came up with, called the eternal recurrence idea, that everything just sort of repeats itself. And then this idea of a reversal of the arrow of time. So maybe you might have like an hourglass universe. That's another idea again. So in this idea, if you were an observer, like imagine you've got a collapsing universe as it bounces and goes out into an expanding universe. And the idea of the arrow of time reversal is that if you were in the contracting branch, you would look back in time, as it were, and see the Big Bang, and you would see it expanding. You wouldn't see it contracting. And similarly, we're in the other branch, we see ours expanding. So if we could go back in time, what would happen is the arrow of time would sort of reverse. So think of it as like duelists pacing away from each other before they turn around and fire the gun. So those are often called Janus universes. The idea is a Roman god of what was it? Time, I think, where he had two faces looking into the past and into the future. So those are like three different ideas. But maybe Neash, we should get you to unpack your versions of the black hole and the cyclic universe, because they are absolutely mind-blowing.
Well, it's nice of you to say that, Phil. So the black hole is fascinating, because I told you singularity is a failure, but we seem to face the same failure inside black holes and at the Big Bang. So maybe they have something to do with each other. In fact, one idea which Phil didn't mention, but in fact it's the one that we're big fans of, is one due to my colleague Leah Smolin, where he thinks that basically inside every black hole that you form and there are probably millions of them that we form in our galaxy, inside each of them a new universe is born. Basically the matter is collapsing and it's kind of past its event horizon, makes it's going almost into making a singularity, but in fact at some point it bounces out, makes a Big Bang, and a new kind of a pocket universe inside the black hole. So inside every black hole there could be a new universe with similar properties, but maybe a slightly different properties as offsprings of our universe. And then those offsprings may have their own black holes. So that's actually the idea, that maybe you could have something like a natural selection, evolution by natural selection, but happening for the black holes. And that could maybe explain some of the properties, the so-called fine tunings we observe in our universe. Why our universe makes so many planets, so many stars, so many black holes. Maybe there is in fact a type of natural selection similar to what's happening with life. So that's one type of a black hole universe. Another one is one where it kind of maybe just a black hole that is collapsing, actually a Big Bang before you form a horizon, actually due to a quantum tunneling event or some sort of quantum event comes out of that. So that something that we explored. It must be a higher dimensional black hole for this to work, but in fact that's another type of black hole universe, that out of a collapsing or forming black hole, an explosion comes out, and that explosion is in fact the Big Bang that we see in our past, and that could also explain some observations.
Earlier in this discussion, Phil mentioned, well, you just mentioned pocket universes, and Phil mentioned something about the black hole and the emerging universe from that. And I know that he meant that you had an idea about it, but he said that you created your own. And I just saw a movie yesterday where somebody created their own pocket universe.
The new Superman movie. Yeah, he keeps his prisoners in a pocket universe.
Yep.
So he created his own Big Bang and everything, and so now he's explaining that he's done that, or that can be done, and you're saying he's done that. So
I'm not saying is that, well, maybe I've done that. I'm not sure. I do have my prisoner somewhere down here. We just need to open the wormhole to them. But yeah, I think probably not yet. They're comfortable, but yeah, I'm a much nicer. I don't know, evil,
Evil scientist.
evil scientist than Lex Luthor. Is it Lex Luthor or Lex Luthor?
It was Lex Luthor who kept, for people that don't know, it was Lex Luthor who kept the prisoners in a pocket universe, not Superman. I don't want to be accused of dissing Superman.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I was personally, well, I should read other people's questions first.
Oh, Aaron, can I just interrupt for 1 sec?
Sure.
Just this idea that Neil mentioned about cosmological natural selection, there's something your viewers might be interested to know. We surveyed physicists about various controversies within physics. And one of them was about this claimed fine-tuning of a constant of nature and what best explains it. And we asked various things. We said, is it brute fact that maybe it doesn't need any sort of metaphysical explanation? Is it what's called anthropic selection in the multiverse? Is it this cosmological natural selection? Is it that the constants are necessary, or is it an intelligent designer? And often people that sort of push this argument, they say we have to choose between a multiverse and an intelligent designer. But we had other options. And in fact, intelligent designer was last. It had like 3%. But this idea of cosmological natural selection had about 10%. So even though it's often never mentioned in these discussions, it gets more than 3 times the votes than an intelligent designer. So something to keep in mind when these topics come up.
Thank you very much for that. All right, I'm going to read a couple of the questions that have been posted from the chat. My Unfinished Journey says, what was before the beginning? There wasn't a before. Christian thinkers think that answer by abstract. The Christian thinkers got that answer by abstract philosophy. So maybe centuries later, science got that answer by observations.
Well, that's one possibility, that the Big Bang is the beginning. That's definitely a possibility. We don't want to rule that out. It's certainly true that the idea of a beginning, it does go back to Christian philosophers, but it's not in the Bible, I don't think. There are other mythologies that I think might describe a beginning. We mentioned some of them in the book, the Nasadiya Sukta, the Kiowa Apache. I think they have models of mythologies of like creation ex nihilo. But I think where you might justify, if I was to say I did think the universe had a beginning, probably what I would justify that is by trying to be a realist about singularity theorems, by saying, no, they really describe what's going on in the universe. The thing is, again, we've surveyed physicists about this. Most of them don't think the singularity is something real. It's just a point where the mathematics breaks down and we need better mathematics. So it's not, so there is, if you wanted to try and justify a beginning by appealing to a singularity, I guess you could, but you would be taking quite a minority stance, and there's certainly no observations that tell us there is a singularity. All the observations, as we point out in the book, they just tell us that the universe was in a hot, dense state. They don't say there was a singularity. Neil, maybe you know of something, but I've never heard of anyone proposing, some observational program that we could check whether there's a singularity or not. There's no such program, right?
I remember mentioning that not every theory of cosmogony includes a singularity. Is that okay?
I mean, I should just again say that singularity as a mathematical abstraction, I mean, it does exist, but it does exist in a theory that we know doesn't describe our universe, which is basically a classical theory of gravity, or Einstein's classical theory of general relativity. But we know that should fail as we approach the singularity, because there's quantum mechanics in the real world. So it's in the real universe, even if someone says they believe in singularity, then you have to counter them. But what about quantum physics? Because your theory fails as you approach a singularity. So I think, any honest physicist would say, that singularity just means that we reach the limit of our known laws. And I think this is not unprecedented. This is I think is not you think that we discover something that hasn't been there before. But 150 years ago, the laws of physics failed at the surface of the sun. So we just didn't have the right laws to describe what's happening inside the sun. We didn't know about plasma physics. We didn't know about nuclear physics. Those things just weren't there 150 years ago. Was that a singularity? Well, not. I mean, it just took time, and we learned the laws, and now we understand what's inside the sun much better than we did 150 years ago.
I appreciate the illustration you've just given about how the physics has to be adapted to account for the reality that we experience, and that what we knew then isn't enough. We need to know more. It reminds me of Lord Kelvin, the guy who devised, or is credited with having devised the laws of thermodynamics. When he once upon a time he estimated the age of the Earth, and I think it was I think in tens of millions of years, or maybe
20 million years he had the age of the sun, because he was assuming it was burning chemically.
Yeah. And also that the Earth, he was using thermodynamics to calculate how long it would take to cool down from a molten mass, and then people came to him and explained that there are hot pockets within the Earth that are producing more heat radioactively, which was something he hadn't accounted for. Right. So now the physics has to account for the radioactivity, which of course pushed the age of the Earth back much further.
Well, the big change was that the sun is a nuclear reactor. It's not a chemical reactor. So nuclear reactors are much more efficient. So the sun has been around for about 4.5 billion years, give or take a few hundred million. But so in fact, this is interesting because people use this as an argument against Darwinian evolution. They said, well, if the sun is only 20 million years old, there's not enough time for evolution to take place. So you had quite an interesting argument. It looked like physics had disproven evolution, but evolution won out because we found new physics. And I think the same is going to be true at the Big Bang, and maybe we've already found that new physics. There are certainly proposals like string theory, loop quantum gravity, causal set theory, Hijaber gravity. These are all proposals for combining general relativity and quantum mechanics. And we need to do that because we know they actually contradict each other. These are two best theories of physics, and they contradict each other. So unless you want to believe in contradictions, and they describe the universe, maybe we want to say, hang on, don't take these seriously. In fact, the best example maybe is in a black hole, because if you just use general relativity, you find that black holes will not radiate any heat. So they don't actually obey the laws of thermodynamics because nothing can get out of a black hole according to general relativity. And what Hawking did was he said, hang on, well, let's include quantum mechanics. We don't have a theory of quantum gravity, but we know a bit about quantum mechanics. We know a bit about general relativity. Let's see if we can put them together in a sort of rough sketch. And lo and behold, actually black holes do obey the laws of thermodynamics. They do emit heat. And this is called Hawking radiation. So Hawking's view was, I've proven these singularity theorems, but that was with general relativity. Just like the black hole, we can't trust the conclusion. We've got to bring in quantum mechanics. And he had one idea called the no boundary proposal, which we go over in the book, about how that might be done. But again, remember, it's one idea of many. And different models like string theory or loop quantum gravity or whatever, they've got different ideas as to what happened at the Big Bang. So it's an open question. And that's what makes it so exciting. This is why it's called the Battle of the Big Bang, the book, because these sort of physicists are sort of fighting each other as to which is the best model. And that's always the fun part of science. Until the data is in, you kind of have to kind of take some guesses to what you think is most plausible. And obviously there's a bit of a bun fight. And that's the human part of doing science.
Let me read another one of these questions that came up. Trevor Wright says, in what ways do theories of cosmic origin shape human identity and meaning across science, culture, and philosophy?
That's a tough question. So I think this is, there are many aspects of this, but I mean, the creationist story, of course, is the part that's the closest to the question. I mean, almost all the religions, but many of them certainly have a creationist story associated with them. And science has its own creationist story. And then this question of okay, which one is a more reliable story? Of course, if you have religious convictions, then you probably should subscribe to your religious creation myth, probably. But then, of course, if you believe in science, or you follow the ideas of science, then there's these two different. There's a different idea. Usually, is a different idea. Are these consistent with each other? Are they not consistent? I think this is something where everyone, every community, every group of people, or every individual had to sit down and decide, okay, so do I have my religious convictions and do I have my scientific convictions? How are these going to come to peace with each other? How can I live? How can I, should I throw out all my religious convictions, or should I just stop living in science? Or is there a way to find peace between these two sets of ideas? Can I moderate my philosophy, my religion, my culture in a way that it can be consistent with the scientific progress? So I think this is very important, because science has been part of our life for millennia in one way or another. This is how we understand the universe around us, and we make progress, and we can build industry, technology, as has been religion. So I think this idea of finding peace between these two and the way for them to coexist with each other is basically the story of humanity. And I think if we examine it and scrutinize it closely, we kind of get to learn how we should go forward and where we should go from here.
Here's where I see a dichotomous distinction between the scientific mind and the religious mind, where one mindset attaches to a particular idea and to the exclusion of everything else. I'm going to believe exactly what I was told to believe. I'm not going to consider any other options. Whereas the scientific perspective, we try to weigh multiple hypotheses against each other whenever possible, allowing that either of them, we're trying to figure out which one is best supported, most likely to be true, or if either of them are valid at all.
One thing I might add, Aaron, is that when we say religious, we've got to remember that religion is quite a broad term. So different religious people have different attitudes to the scientific endeavor. So, I've had discussions with the young earth creationists, and they're very, hard-nosed, the world is whatever it is, I don't know, 5,000 years old or something. But I also had discussions with people like Francis Collins, who directed the Human Genome Project. He was the medical advisor to 3 presidents. And he, obviously he's very open to, he accepts evolution, and and of course one of the scientists that came up with the Big Bang theory was Georges Lemaitre, and he was a Catholic priest. And in fact, when the Pope tried to use the Big Bang as evidence of God, he was not happy about that. He said, "Don't do that." He warned against it, and apparently he told the Pope, shut up, don't stop trying to use the Big Bang as evidence for God, because it isn't. So I think we have to keep in mind there's a diversity of different opinions within religion. Religion is people say it's a conflict between science and religion, and I would always say, which religion? What are you talking about when you say religion? Because it's such a broad stroke, broad brush, that it maybe doesn't really mean much. So I think those religious views that are very literalist in their creation stories, that's where we have a debate. We have to say, no, I think you're wrong there. But others will see as metaphorical, and there's a whole diversity of different views we have to keep in mind.
If you, and I wasn't aware of this, if you'd gotten an interview with Francis Collins, and you're definitely a tier above me.
Oh no, I debated him. It wasn't an interview.
Debated him.
Yeah, he got a new book out, and so they got me in as the atheist. And but he did push that the Big Bang was the beginning as an argument for God, and then I said, no, it isn't. And he said, okay.
All right, I've got another question posted here.
But he didn't push back on it, I can tell you that.
We've got another question here from Dan Hansbury. Could a black hole eventually reach a degree where it could match the singularity?
Well, I can maybe take that. So so the idea is that any black hole, in fact, that's how we define black holes. Any black hole should contain a singularity within it. In fact, that's how we define. So there is this idea, there's an event horizon.
Oh, Neash has frozen up. Should we give him a sec? Otherwise, I'll try and step in. Okay, I'll try and step in.
His world has become unstable due to
Sorry,
his
I think I fell into a black hole. Am I outside the black hole yet or not?
Yes, we can see.
Okay.
Your time delay. You time delayed so that you actually froze in time.
I see. I think my black hole has evaporated, fortunately now. Right. So yeah. So there's this event horizon. If you're inside the event horizon, then your only possible fate is to fall into a singularity, which is this place where basically everything is torn apart. If you're outside of it, you have a chance to escape and then live another day. So that's the definition of a black hole. So all the black holes, by definition, at least in the classical theory of general relativity, contain a singularity. But what happens to this singularity is, but there is this caveat that they're all dressed in, so that this is the technical language that we use. We have naked singularities versus dressed singularities. So naked singularity is something you can actually directly see. There's not closed, just out there for everyone to see, which is bad. Because we don't understand what's going on. But then there was this conjecture by Penrose, it's known as the censorship conjecture, which says that most singularities that you form are actually dressed with event horizons. That means that there is a region of a space that would fall into the singularity, but you cannot really communicate with that region. So that region is really censored. Any information of singularity, or anyone who can fall into the singularity, actually, I should take that back. We cannot really communicate with singularity because there is this event horizon that basically you need to go faster than the speed of light to get out of that. And it is possible, and that's something that people debate about, that when black holes evaporate, or if they last long enough, they may turn into the naked singularity. Certainly, if the black holes evaporate, they kind of get smaller and smaller. At some point, you're left with something. Could that be a naked singularity? And that's something that we talk about. And I think the majority of scientists think that doesn't happen, at least in 3 space dimensions and 1 time dimension. But yeah, there are exotic possibilities where you could have naked singularities at the end of the life of black holes.
Okay, naked and single. Gotcha. My unfinished sock. I love that name. Up for $6.66, and says, "Don't make up crazy conspiracy theories about a King James version palindrome in the chat. Like and share the stream instead." Thank you very much for that. And then Milwaukee Atheist asked if I saw the text message about the hot sauce they bought. Yes, I saw that. Thank you. And then Dr. Osiris says, question, does anyone on the panel think that bouncing cosmology is becoming increasingly more popular? I heard that each measurement has shown that the universe is actually TBC?
To be continued.
Okay, gotcha. And then finishes, is that true?
He said it's slowing down.
Oh, slowing down.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think it is true. Yeah. I think they're making a bit of a comeback. There was, I think in the 1980s and 90s, they'd gone out of fashion and people have sort of shown that you couldn't have a bouncing universe. There was a paper by...
That's the Big Bang, Big Crunch that they used to talk about?
Well, a bounce doesn't necessarily involve that. Well, we have to think of two versions of this, right? So one is a cyclic universe that expands and contracts, then it would bounce back out. But there's another version, yeah. So like an accord, just doing this and just expand, contract, expand, contract. So that's one version. But another version is what we might think of as an hourglass universe. So it's just one region of contraction and one region of expansion. So, and both of those are actively being considered. And where I think the bouncers come back is in two forms. And we go over both of those in the book in more detail. But one is people have made like quantum gravity proposals, like string theory and loop quantum gravity. And some of these would suggest that there's like a maximum density that you can reach for space. So think of a sponge. You pour water on the sponge and it absorbs the water. But eventually the sponge gets full up. And if you keep pouring more water on it, it switches its properties. So it's not water absorbent anymore, it's water repellent. So the idea is that space kind of would be the same, that it would absorb more and more energy as you squeeze all the galaxies in together. But there'll come a point, there's a limit. And once you reach that limit, if you keep on squeezing, it will just become repulsive. So gravity becomes repulsive. So this would be like a bouncing universe. So that's one way the idea of the bounce has sort of come back. The loop quantum gravity guys are particularly keen on this. Some ideas in string theory suggest this, but not all of the different string theory models do. So that's one way. And then there's this other idea, another mainstream idea that we haven't mentioned, is there's this thing called inflation. And inflation is this very rapid expansion of space. It's a pretty mainstream idea. And it's what's thought to lead to a multiverse. But there are some critics of inflation, and they've shown that, or they claim to have shown, there's some debate about this, is that if you actually had a contracting universe and then an expansion from a bounce, that you could actually mimic some of the successes of inflation. So maybe you don't need inflation. So that's sort of two ways I think you could say that the bouncing idea has come back, and it's certainly more popular now than it was 30 years ago. We still don't know if it's right, but I would definitely say it's more popular today than it has been in the past.
One of the earliest questions, if not the first question that was posed on this show today, was how much these different origins affect humanity, and I take a different stance. They don't. I feel that whether the universe had a beginning or not is irrelevant to everything I do, because it doesn't change the fact that we are evolving apes. That everything I study, in biology, taxonomy, and so forth, would be the same whether the universe was continuous or whether it had a beginning, whether it was created, wouldn't change anything. But that's just me. So, but it's a weird thing when I'm trying to explain evolution to people, and people realize that I'm focusing on taxonomy. They only want to talk about cosmology. But if I was a cosmologist, then they would only be talking about population genetics.
Well, I think that you could say that about any question that we're curious about, right? I mean, I think humans are curious species. We really want to know our origins. Like that's why so many religions have creation stories. Or maybe it's one reason why, maybe not be the only reason why. So I think we have this burning desire to understand our origins. And it's true, whether the universe had a beginning or not isn't going to affect, when I go to the shops today, or, when I was a student, what university do I pick? Do I decide to propose to the girl I love? All these sorts of questions. No, it's true, they don't affect that. But you could say about anything, right? I mean, you could say that about whether humans evolved from a common ancestor from chimps. Does that affect, who I propose to, who I spend my time with? It doesn't, but it's part of our humanity that we desperately, I think, want to know more and more about our origins. And where you have discussions with religious apologists, if they make the argument, like the Kalam argument that says, was one of its premises, the universe had a beginning, or even that the universe had a cause, then we need to turn to science and say, are those premises correct? And as part of that discourse, we do talk about the Big Bang and whether it was the beginning or not. So if you're interested in having that kind of discourse, this thing is extremely relevant. If you're not interested in questions about your origins or religious Kalam arguments and things, if those things aren't on your radar, sure, this is not on your radar. But I think for many, many people, we want to know the nature of our origins.
So if I may disagree a little bit with my co-author and I guess with our gracious host, I actually think that these origins stories, they are extremely relevant to what happened today. I mean, if anything, why one reason is that we keep talking about it. So there must be some reason we keep talking about it. But I mean, I think there's a simple reason. I mean, those who don't learn from history, they are bound to repeat these mistakes. Like that's what was here. History is not just what happened, I don't know, during World War II or during the McCarthyism or in 1960s. History is what happened anytime. And these lessons, they may not be as immediate, but they're still lessons. And these lessons, if we learn them properly, these are things that affect us. And I mean, for example, so the rules of quantum mechanics, I mean, yes, they are very abstract. They are describing the microscopic world, but then when we learned them, we managed to use them to develop all sorts of technology that now we use every day. And life, basically, life wouldn't be possible the way we do it today without the rules of quantum mechanics. So I think this understanding is very important. And yeah, it looks like these are removed from our everyday life, but it's really the quest for understanding, that if we can understand the universe, being in the solar system, in outer galaxy, if we can understand it more completely in a more kind of comprehensible way to humans, then we could use that to understand ourselves, to describe what we can do, what we cannot do, what's useful for us, what's harmful to us, at some philosophical level, but also at also a purely practical level.
I think what I was going for there was not to imply that I was incurious or that your vocation is immaterial. I was only going for the idea that I'm not holding to a belief system. I do weigh multiple hypotheses whenever there are multiple hypotheses to consider. And what I face with dealing with fundamentalists all the time is that they think that if they can find some flaw in cosmology, then that will force me to undo everything I understand about nature. And because that's how their belief system is, right? It's all this house of cards that everything has to be just so. But my position is not that way. So yeah, sure. You want to say that the universe had a beginning? Okay, fine. What difference does it make from my argument? So just to remind everybody, we are here today to promote the book that you both wrote. Mm-hmm. And in the 5 minutes that we've got left, I'd like, if you haven't covered everything that's in there, and it looks like you may have.
Oh, oh, there's lots more.
Well, when you read the outline and it talks about what you guys talk about there, we have touched on all of those. So
yeah.
So maybe I can go a little bit. So of course we do cover a lot of models of the Big Bang, as we've discussed. Many, in fact, I think we have 25 of them, and we have a very handy table at the end of the book. If you forgot all your Big Bang models, you could reference all the models and the similarities and differences. But beyond that, we try to bring this all together, in fact, to address this very question that where is science and where is religion, and how do they interact with cosmology? And I think maybe one of the things we didn't really talk about is it's not really a battle between, I mean, although the book is called Battle of the Big Bang, it's not really a battle between science and religion when we talk about the Big Bang, but rather there are really a lot of similarities. In particular, I mean, one thing that I kind of experienced personally is the stories that many cosmologists have for what happened at the Big Bang, they can be kind of very orthodoxical in the sense that they believe their story more than anyone else, even though there is not enough evidence supporting it, so much so that it becomes like a religious belief. Of course, there are scientists, I'm not saying that's necessarily religion, but I find that extremely similar to kind of some religious fanatics who believe in their stories or their creationist stories or their other religious beliefs without evidence. So these similarities between science and religion, I don't think it's random. I think it's humanity. And I mean, as a scientist, I think of religion as an emergent phenomenon, that same way that we think there's liquid and then gas and there's solid. So humans, when they get together, they tend to find religious tendencies to form communities and power structures. And that happened elsewhere throughout the history, but also that happens within scientific communities. And I think by understanding religion, we can understand what scientists, well, some tendencies of scientists become when they become too dug into their own positions. But also from that, we could learn, okay, so what part of science is one which is grounded in observations, and what part of science is one that may be grounded in our culture and in religious tendencies. And we kind of try to separate those two and see how we could kind of have a peaceful coexistence between our human tendencies.
I think, fortunately, what I usually see among physicists is the position like what Sean Carroll takes is about. Sure, it's possible the universe had a beginning. In my favorite model, it's then the universe is eternal in both directions, that kind of thing. And he talks about how some assumptions may be wrong. That's always a possibility. I love the way that he put that, being completely open. So that it's definitely not a belief system like it's painted to be. All right, gentlemen, last comments?
Well, one thing that I'm particularly excited about is that in the last chapter of the book, we talk about experiments that could actually push beyond the Big Bang. And there's all kinds of fantastic missions that have been proposed, and we go over how they might work and how they might be able to sort of settle the battle of the Big Bang and sort of declare a winner. And that to me is super exciting. Obviously, we're in a worrisome time because a lot of missions are getting cancelled, so that is very worrisome. But I think there's reason for optimism that we are dreaming about these ideas. They are at least possible, and yeah, if you read the book, you'll find out how they might work and how that they could actually come to a conclusion about what really happened at the Big Bang. But at the moment, we've got to be honest and say we don't know. But that doesn't mean we can't know.
Right.
All right, and Doctor, your position?
I certainly agree. I think that there are things to be pessimistic about, but I think that ultimately ultimately optimism is how we end this. These are questions that are deep and they're centuries long, but we have ways of addressing them, and we talked about some of the ways of addressing them. If there is a will, there's a way.
Okay, and I did include a link if you want to buy Battle of the Big Bang. The link is in the description. Check it out. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you.
Always.